Okay, so for today's video, I want to have a discussion about Wild Assault. I figured now was a good time to do this video because we have had Wild Assault in the game for a little while now. It came with Season 3. I think we've had enough time to be able to make this type of educated discussion and come to a conclusion of whether we think the game is better or worse off because of Wild Assault's existence. So as I said, this mechanic was introduced in Season 3, and it's already been nerfed, actually. In my opinion, this mechanic was probably released intentionally overpowered, because they probably wanted to make sure we actually use the hot new mechanic of the version. So the first thing I want to talk about with Wild Assault is let's just actually break down kind of how it works, that way we're all on the same page. So the first thing about Wild Assault is that it costs your burst gauge, which is a very interesting shift in how this game has played since its introduction. So just talking about that a little bit, I actually like that this costs burst gauge. I think it's super interesting that we have two different resources that we have to balance now. One of the defining traits of Guilty Gear, I think, is actually resource management. Not just character-specific resources, which, of course, there's plenty of characters that have their own unique resources, but even just tension gauge and burst gauge have always been very vital to being a top-level Guilty Gear player. It's one of the big things that separates top players from the rest of the player base, is how they manage resources. Very often, the reason why top players win at this game is because of how they manage resources. So I like that Guilty Gear actually focused in on this a little bit as kind of like a defining skill of Guilty Gear. The second resource being your burst gauge is a little bit odd because it's the first time they've ever tried to do this, where your burst gauge is more than just a burst gauge. Bursting is super valuable in Guilty Gear, and frankly, Guilty Gear is a series where it's pretty messed up, and they're allowed to do that because you have a burst. Now, the thing about it costing bursts is you could tell that they knew immediately that it had to be very strong, and that it was very strong, because they also changed a lot of system mechanics surrounding the burst gauge with Season 3. We need to consider that Wild Assault is directly related to positive bonus and burst regen in this version of the game. They changed all three of those things, and they all kind of go hand in hand in talking about the strength of the mechanic of Wild Assault. So over the course of Season 3, they changed how burst regeneration works, and overall in Strive, you actually build a lot of burst gauge for getting hit. The amount of burst you get for getting comboed in this game is actually really high. So even just after this like pretty basic combo, I end up building Chip like over half of his burst, and that was a very basic combo. Longer combos are going to build even more burst gauge than that. And this is partly just because they changed burst regen overall, but they also made it to where whenever you get wall stuck by the opponent, you build a ton of burst, wall stuck or wall broken. So right here, Chip obviously doesn't have very much burst available, but as soon as he gets wall broken, he's going to get a ton of burst from it. And this is a very big change with the game, because this means that we're getting so much more burst gauge throughout a match of Guilty Gear than we would have previously, especially because they've done a lot of things over the years to lower damage in Strive. It takes more combos to kill people than it did previously, and this also goes hand in hand with the fact that Wild Assault as a mechanic, part of the strength of it is that it gives us access to better conversions more consistently, which means that we're going to be breaking the wall more often from these combos, so characters are getting that extra burst gain from getting wall broken that they would have gotten otherwise. So yeah, lots of changes came with the burst gauge in this version. I think those were overall net positive, and I think having mechanics tied to the burst gauge is overall net positive as well. So initially for this video, I'm going to be talking about Wild Assault kind of generally, or more specifically talking about Orange Wild Assault, because it's the one that most characters have, and also, spoilers, it's the one that's considered the best overall. Wild Assault is a forward advancing attack that you can cancel into from your normals, just like a special move. And basically what this results in is way more conversions, way more ways to extend combos, as well as way more ways to extend pressure on block. This immediately is very concerning because Guilty Gear is a game that's already known for having very strong offense. Even some of the weakest characters in the game can win if they just simply get on offense. That's how potent offense can be in this series. Even though they've nerfed Wild Assault, I still think this aspect of it is pretty concerning. So let's talk about why. Being able to convert hits in a game like Guilty Gear is actually such a premium. A lot of how characters are evaluated in a game like Strive actually comes down to how they're able to convert hits. If you look at some of the characters that have a history of being top tier in this version, characters like Happy Chaos, Ram, Nago, Assol, those characters, part of the reason why they're so strong is because they convert very consistently and have very high damage conversions. Whereas if you look at some of the characters that tend to not be very good over time, characters like Testament, Bedman, and whatnot, those characters tend to not have very good conversions or are very situational when they're allowed to convert. Wall Assault as a mechanic allows characters universally to convert better than they could, and this is both a blessing and a curse. Let's take a character like Testament, for example. That character was a character that has generally always been considered pretty low tier in this game, and part of the reason why is they don't have conversions. They have good pokes and neutral, but it doesn't really matter if you got hit by them most of the time. On the flip side, take a character that is usually top tier like Ram. Ram gets pretty good conversions, or at least gets Oki off of most of her hits, unlike Testament does. And that honestly is like a night and day difference in the strength of how the character is considered. So for a character like Testament, it's actually kind of cool that they have Wild Assault because it fixes one of their biggest downsides, which is not having good conversions. And them having it feels fine and feels justified for the character. So previously with Ram, you would get something like this off of your pokes. That's all you could get. You would get Far Slash Daro. And this was already very good to have. Having a poke like her Far Slash and being able to get Oki off of it was very nice. Or with Meter, you could, do a full combo from it with Roman Cancel, right? Which is already super good and is one of the reasons why she's generally a top tier character in this game. In Season 3 onwards, Ram can literally start the game by wall breaking, which just doesn't feel correct. Like, the fact that I'm getting this much reward from a round start neutral interaction is just game changing with this character. Something that's really important to keep in mind with fighting games is system mechanics tend to benefit characters that are better already, because they have better tools. Being able to convert is a nice buff for Testament, and it makes the character feel a little bit more complete. It doesn't push Testament over the line or anything, and in fact, they're still considered low tier this version of the game. Whereas a character like Ram, who has amazing tools, who could already convert decently well, it feels like you're pushing something over the top. This applies to other characters that are top tier this version of the game as well. So thinking about characters like Chip, for example, or Kai, or something like that, those characters are already super good, already had really good strengths, and now Wild Assault feels like it's kind of pushing them over the edge in many regards. We can also talk about just its implications as a block string tool, not even just converting it for a combo, but just being able to get offense from pokes like this is very, very different in Guilty Gear. Being able to turn any type of poke, even just into offense, can be game changing. The thing about using a resource to get offense, it's inherently worse than using a resource to get a combo because you're not getting guaranteed return. If you're using it for a combo, you're hitting the opponent, you're getting reward from it. Using it on offense, you're not guaranteed that same return because you don't know if your offense is actually going to work out. Offense in Guilty Gear is so potent that the odds of me being able to turn this close slash into a good strike throw for myself that will probably work for me is pretty high. And also, going back to what I was saying about how burst regen works this version, even if I spend my burst gauge in this way, and maybe my offense doesn't work out, maybe my opponent bashes out of it, or they back throw me, or whatever happens, I go for a bunch of frame traps, I push the opponent away, and they block it all, so I don't have burst gauge anymore. You build burst so quickly in this version of the game that it doesn't feel that detrimental to spend it this way anyways. So one of the things that Wild Assault actually does inadvertently is it makes defensive options such as instant block and FD and IBFD weaker because Wild Assault exists. So let's take a character like Leo, for example. One of the things that Leo has to do normally throughout a game of Strive is doing 5k 6k or 2k 6k. This is how he converts K buttons. His 5k and his 2k are great buttons. And one downside to 6k is that it's -4 on block, which is generally not punishable by most of the cast. But if you're able to instant block it, you could actually go for a throw punish on his 6k. The only thing he could do to try to beat this is do this special move on block to try to like frame trap the throw, but getting the timing on this to beat a throw is not easy. It's literally a frame perfect timing to be able to frame trap a throw, and the special move otherwise is punishable on block, so if you just block it, you'd punish him. Because of the existence of Wild Assault, if Leo recognizes that you instant blocked him, he can just do Wild Assault instead to stay advantageous. And of course, this is costing a resource, right? It's not like it's free or anything. It's putting Leo on offense, and Leo's offense is quite good. So it's not like it's that big of a detriment. And if he ends up hitting you, it doesn't even matter that he spent the burst gauge room. If you end up hitting him, he's a high health character with great defensive options. He's going to be able to survive long enough until he gets his burst gauge back. So it's not that big of a deal, even if it doesn't work out for him. Because of the existence of Wild Assault, it's actually removing or greatly diminishing the effect of a type of counterplay you had available to the character. And this applies to pretty much anything that was weak to instant block previously. You have plenty of time to be able to react to an instant block, cancel into Wild Assault, to keep yourself safe, and not just safe, but at advantage instead. Even something like Faultless Defense is kind of mitigated by having Wild Assault as well. during my block string, I can see that my opponent is doing flawless defense, and I can spend Wall Assault to stay on offense rather than letting them push me away. You know, you spend all of your meter trying to FD your opponent out, and then you finally push them away from you, and you're like, okay, you know, I'm holding FD, I'm blocking these frame traps, they push themselves away, and then they just spend the resource to push themselves back in. And look how much meter Leo lost. At the start of that sequence, he had 50 meter, and then by the end of it, he barely had any to FD with anymore. Obviously, it isn't like a huge deal. It doesn't make these mechanics terrible, but it does make defense even weaker than it already was in this game, which is probably not ideal. The other thing that Wall Assault messes with in regards to defensive options is that it also does drain the opponent's burst stage. It drains their burst stage by about 10% or so, which is less than it used to, by the way. It was insane before. This used to drain like 30% of their burst stage or something. I have no idea what they were thinking with that. It's just enough time that if you spend it for like a mix-up, right? If you are like, even just something very simple and universal, something like this. With that hit, you can probably do a decent combo before they get their burst back. And in general, it's just enough time that anybody could spend a Wild Assault and go for a mix-up and not have to worry about burst being a defensive option that's on the table. Between that and also just having combos that can be semi or entirely burst safe, this really adds to the fact that the game is more snowbally than it was previously. However, I actually think this part of Wild Assault is actually pretty balanced at this point. I think it taking just a little bit of your burst gauge is actually perfect. And I think if it didn't take any burst gauge, it would feel kind of bad using Wild Assault a lot of the time. So I think this part of the mechanic is actually pretty smart. So the other thing about Wild Assault that it does, if all of this wasn't enough for you, is it also gives you a hard knockdown when you use it to break the wall. If I do a combo with Ram here, and I get a wall stick with with my combo, like this, and I break the wall with Wild Assault, it will give me a hard knockdown. This is an insane change for this game, because previously the only way to get a hard knockdown from a wall break was with super. This makes the game even more snowbally than it used to be, and makes it so much easier to properly benefit from positive bonus, where a lot of these characters that are strong, again, like Ram, Chip, Soul, all of those characters, they benefit so much from a hard knockdown on wall break with positive bonus. It makes the game so much more volatile and snowbally than it ever was before. This makes things like DPRC better than it used to be, which I literally have a video about that if you want to go look at that, talking about how Wild Assault being able to hard knockdown actually makes things like DPRC way better than they used to be. It benefits so many characters in so many ways, some more than others, and it has greatly impacted the overall flow of this game. The last thing we need to talk about with Wild Assault, generally speaking, is about positive bonus, because like I was saying earlier, you kind of have to take both hand in hand, because oftentimes Wild Assault is letting you achieve positive bonus way more consistently than we ever have been. Wild Assault would honestly be a lot weaker in another game that doesn't have wall break and positive bonus as a mechanic, but that's not what we're playing Strive, so we have those mechanics. So for example, as Ram, I'm able to take a round start hit and turn that hit into a hard knockdown and get positive bonus from it. And positive bonus in this version of the game is insane. So they've already nerfed it once. They've already nerfed how positive bonus works. In Season 3, they made it to where positive bonus gives you burst gauge back, and it gave you about 70%. I have no idea what they were thinking with that. It was actually insane. But they've nerfed it now. From positive bonus, you get about 30% of your burst gauge back. However, in the patch that they nerfed it, they also buffed the way that you gain meter. So you actually gain tension gauge faster during a positive bonus. However, positive bonus lasts for less time in total. So they've made a lot of changes to it between Season 3 and the patch after Season 3. So what this results in is you're able to get positive bonus way more consistently because of Wild Assault, and offense with positive bonus is so potent with a lot of these characters that also have good conversions that oftentimes you just lose because you got hit by one conversion into a hard knockdown into positive bonus. So that's kind of it for Wild Assault generally speaking. Now we can actually talk about the 3 different versions. I've spent most of the time talking about Orange Wild Assault, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this one. But it is the one that most characters have. I believe 16 characters in total have Orange Wild Assault. And the main advantage to Orange Wild Assault is just the fact that it's the fastest one. And the reason that's important is it means that it combos from more normal. So for example, Ram's 2S combos into Wild Assault, whereas it wouldn't with blue or white Wild Assault. And this doesn't sound like it's actually that crazy an advantage, but For most characters that have orange Wild Assault, they're able to convert almost any of their pokes into Wild Assault into a full combo. So there's honestly not much to talk about the orange one, but it is by far the best one in my opinion, and the conversions and offense you get from it are incredible. There's basically no downside to having the orange one. Talking about blue Wild Assault, which is probably generally considered the weaker of the blue Wild Assaults, though I don't think that means it is weak. I actually think it's pretty good at this version. The unique aspect of blue Wild Assault is that it is slower on startup, so it doesn't actually combo from things like far slashes, for example. However, the advantage of it is that on block, it actually causes a guard crush. So this is often on characters that are more mix-up oriented, characters like Milia, Baiken, stuff like that. It's on those types of characters. And for them, it's usually pretty good, at least for some of those characters. So the advantage of the blue one is that you're supposed to use it to go on offense and go for some type of mix-up. In the case of Elfelt, you'd use it to go into her Rekka series and go for a high-low or something. Or if you're in the corner, you'd use it to go into her Pineberry and go for a mix-up that way. So it's basically a way for these characters to force mix-ups on block. Frankly, going back to something I said earlier, when you're using something for offense rather than a conversion, you're not guaranteed the return on it, right? So if your tool, the advantage of it is the fact that you're spending a resource for the chance to hit your opponent, that's weaker than a tool that is being used to extend a hit that you already got on somebody, generally speaking. But like I said, it's still good, it's just not crazy. If anything, blue Wild Assault is the balanced one of all of them. The last type of Wild Assault, and easily the most controversial one, is going to be white Wild Assault. Now, the thing about this one that makes it particularly unique is it is on the least amount of characters. It is only on the big bodies. So what makes this one unique is the fact that it is actually invincible on startup after a certain point. So after frame 9 of your white Wild Assault, your character is completely invincible. So if I record shift, try to hit me with a far slash here, and I timed this correctly, it's just not going to work. The idea of this mechanic is it's supposed to help the big body characters who have difficulty getting in because they're slow and they don't have great movement options. It gives them a way to be able to bypass characters who have large pokes or good projectiles or something like that. It's kind of a way for them to kind of high roll and force their way in against those characters. It's a bit odd that you're giving them a mechanic that is fixing their literal biggest inherent issue. I don't know if that's like the best way to go about it. Characters are supposed to have downsides. You're not supposed to just fix their downsides. They're supposed to have those. But I don't think it's inherently a problem. I think what is actually an issue here is that the counterplay to the mechanic doesn't really exist. So you can't combo off of this. In fact, on hits, Wild Assault doesn't, or White Wild Assault in particular, doesn't let you combo or anything. You can't cancel it on hit or block. All it does is it gives you a hard knockdown, which is plenty enough for these characters, because the one thing all four of these characters have in common between Gold Lewis, Potemkin, Nago, and Bedman, they only need one chance. If they get on offense, they can win the entire game from that. They're balanced around that it's hard for them to get that one chance going. If they hit you with a Wild Assault, that's all they need. And on block, you also get a guard crush, so you're at frame advantage on block. So even if you block the mechanic, you're not winning. In fact, you're losing because you're still giving them that one chance. That's all they need. Problem with this is that the only way to really punish this mechanic is to try to jump over it, which is not really accessible for like most characters or in most situations. It's like a super hard read to be able to jump over a White Wall Assault and punish it. The timing on that is very impractical, and you're not going to be able to do it in matches consistently. And the only other counterplay is trying to make it whiff, but I don't know if you've seen how far this goes. You're not going to make that whiff most of the time. So the problem with White Wall Assault is that it's a mechanic that is supposed to punish the characters for abusing long-range pokes, or force them to stop using those mechanics or those tools in anticipation of White Wall Assault. Problem is that even if the player with those tools, if the character keeping out the big body is using their tools, and they stop using them in anticipation of White Wall Assault, there's no way to consistently punish the White Wall Assault. And I think that's where the mechanic gets most of the complaints. It's a very toxic mechanic, right? It's a forward advancing, invincible, plus on block, hard knockdown tool. It's insane. And you don't even have a way to punish it, and I think that's the problem with the mechanic overall. So that's everything we need to know about Wild Assault. We understand all of the advantages and disadvantages to the mechanic and how it changed the game with resources and how they had to change positive bonus and all of that. So now the final question is Wild Assault good for the game or not? Before I give you my answer, I want to know what you guys over on YouTube think. Let me know down below before you hear what I have to say. I want to know what you think about the mechanic. Do you think that it's been overall positive for the game? Do you think it's fun? Or do you think that it's kind of toxic or maybe overpowered and doesn't really fit the game currently? I want to know what you think. Let me know down below. I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. I think the positives are that it's obviously fun, having more ways to run offense and be able to do combos and conversions. A large part of the appeal of fighting games is to be able to run your offense and do, you know, cheap things to your opponent. That's kind of how the series is, in general, how Guilty Gear is designed, is that you have these incredibly overpowered things, and the fun part is that you both are throwing overpowered things at each other. That's kind of the appeal of the series at the end of the day. It can be pretty unfun because you're just getting hit by things constantly that are converting into full combos into these crazy Oki situations, even more so than we already had to deal with. Guilty Gear has always been a series where a lot of characters and just generally the flow of the game is balanced around the fact that not every hit is supposed to lead into a full combo into crazy Oki, but with a mechanic like Wild Assault, more often than not your hits are leading to something very significant. However, my final thoughts on Wild Assault is that I think how it currently is balanced is on paper fine. What I think is maybe the actual issue is I don't think the game is designed around it. Look, Wild Assault is a mechanic that was added in Season 3. The game's been out for about 3 years at this point. These characters and the mechanics that already existed in the game were not designed with Wild Assault in mind, or any of the changes they've made with the burst gauge, for example. When you make a mechanic as powerful as Wild Assault is, and frankly game-defining and character-changing as it is, the characters and the system mechanics around it don't change to accommodate for it, it's going to feel pretty out of place and pretty overpowered. That said, I don't think it was possible for them to really predict what changes they'd have to make to all of the characters and all of the system changes without giving us plenty of time to play the game with Wild Assault in it to see how characters should be changed accordingly. For characters like Ram and Chip, them having the conversion capabilities that they do is probably too good with Wild Assault in mind. So the characters themselves should probably be changed accordingly to keep this in mind. Whereas other characters like Testament, like I was mentioning earlier, feels a little bit more in line with Wild Assault. So really, I think the conclusion is, I think the mechanic's in a fine spot at this point, but it could probably be fine-tuned to fit the game a little bit better. More importantly though, I think they should probably look at how all of the characters and other system mechanics are functioning around Wild Assault at this point and make appropriate changes. That all said, before signing off on this video, I just want to clarify again, I actually think this version of the game is very good. I think this is my favorite version of Strive. So I'm mostly just talking about things from kind of the competitive health of the game, that kind of perspective. I think this version's pretty fun, and they did a pretty good job overall. Anyways, again, I would like to know what you guys over on YouTube think. Let me know down in the comments below if you agree with my thoughts or if you don't, and what you would do about Wild Assault if you think it should be changed. If you enjoyed the video, please consider dropping a like and a comment. It actually helps the algorithm for YouTube videos a lot if you do those two things, so I'd really appreciate it. I'm trying to grow my YouTube channel. Of course, consider subscribing while you're down there as well for future content. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.